digitization. Back to you, Calvin.
All right, thank you, Noah, for that. Now, let's move on. As prices of animal products continue to soar, it is the expectation of the consumers that the food on the table is wholesome and safe. Antimicrobial resistance, however, is threatening food systems, putting the health of humans and animals at great risk. On today's episode of The Resident Vet, our reporter, Dr. Paul Kangede, talks to Dr. Victor Oyamo about the antimicrobial effects on animals. I'll leave you with this as we conclude also. My name is Kelvin Nyakundi. Have a wonderful day.
Sometimes the food we consume has residues of medicines that have been used to treat animals, and this has led to a phenomenon called antimicrobial resistance. In our today's episode of The Resident Vet, we'll be joined by Dr. Yamo, who is going to tell us more about antimicrobial resistance, how it comes about, and what we can do to mitigate it, to make sure that the food that runs on our plate is wholesome and safe.
Antimicrobial resistance is essentially when organisms are not able to be treated by medicaments that used to treat them. And maybe what I need to say what an antimicrobial is. An antimicrobial is any synthetic or natural substance that can inhibit or kill a microorganism. And so there are certain classes of antimicrobials. For instance, those that kill bacteria are known as antibiotics. Those that kill viruses are known as antiviruses. Those that kill parasites, you have antihelminthics that kill worms. You have antiprotozoans that kill protozoa. So there's a whole category of organisms, and depending on which product you use, it becomes that. So essentially you're saying antimicrobial resistance is when that organism is no longer susceptible to that product. Yeah? So an antibiotic resistant is where the antibiotic no longer kills the bacteria or inhibits the growth of the bacteria that it used to do. Globally, if I use the easier one, antibiotics have been used for quite a while, some time. And essentially what has been happening, if you followed the development of antibiotics, is that antibiotics are normally taken for about 5 days. But then what happens is that by day 3, a good antibiotic, you'll start feeling that you're getting better. And therein lies one of the dangers, is that when people get better, they stop taking the antibiotic. But what happens when you see antibiotic, when you start noticing antibiotic resistance, is that you take the same antibiotic, by day 3 you're not feeling any better, by day 5 you're not feeling any better when the treatment should be concluded. And in certain facilities you can find that the antibiotic that used to treat in 5 days is now treating the same disease in 10 days, 15 days, and that just begins to show you that there's a problem happening. What happens, Dr. is that we are in a situation where we are producing a lot of animals in an intensive system. So we're putting so many animals in a very small space. And essentially then what tends to happen is that because of pressure around the stocking density is too high, that leads to a lot of stress. The animals then are able to get disease conditions. So one way that we then have farming systems contribute to antimicrobial resistance is when these animals get sick, they must be treated. And during that treatment processes, if the farmer still sells the product, either the eggs or the milk or the meat, then essentially what tends to happen is that the consumer is then consuming the antibiotic at low doses, which then starts selecting the organisms that the consumer has, the natural microflora that the consumer has. The other way that antimicrobial resistance is generated is when we do not use the proper drugs. And essentially in farming systems, farmers have realized, we've learned that farmers, as part of what they do is, one, they do not take a sick animal to the veterinarian. They take shortcuts, and part of the shortcuts is a farmer will ask another farmer, oh, I can see my chickens are having 1 or 2, 3 signs, and the other farmer will then relate and say, when I have had a problem like that, I ended up in a situation where I used a certain product. That is very dangerous because farmers are not technical experts. For you to be able to know which product to use, you need to engage a veterinarian who needs to examine the animal, do laboratory tests where possible, and then isolate what organism is causing the problem, and then the appropriate medicament that can be used. The other problem we have is that farmers occasionally, because of the poor hygiene situation that they're in, farmers have learned that by using antibiotics periodically at low dose, they can mask the problem. And that's one of the big things we say as World Animal Protection. Antibiotics essentially, especially, have been used to mask poor welfare conditions. Instead of the farmer having good hygiene, good biosecurity, good sanitation, and ensuring that the animal has a good environment and comfortable environment and is fed well, because of challenges that are in management of that production system, the animals tend to get sick, and the farmer then has known at around this point the animals will get sick, so they give what we call prophylactic dose. That dose is the same antibiotic but at lower dose. It means that the products that are coming from that animal, eggs or milk specifically, then would have antibiotic residues, and that brings challenges. Humans are having situations where I have an organism that should have been able to be managed using normal products, but because the product, I've been consuming the product from milk or from meat or from eggs at low doses, at the point when I become sick, I cannot be treated using that product, or we need a higher concentration of that drug to treat. Remember when I said that sometimes the treatment period becomes longer. And so essentially what we are saying is that antimicrobial resistance has problems at the animal level, because that animal might also not be treated, and it ultimately ends up in a situation where the animal must be destroyed. But it has also problems at human level. But the biggest one for me is the contamination of the environment. When the environment is contaminated, and as we've said, water, and it rains, we end up with a big spread of the environment being contaminated, and that then ensures that AMR resistant genes are dispersed across a bigger geographical situation. And that gives us problems, because we can see if you had a problem in the morning because of travel, we can even have the same problem in Nairobi, Kenya in a short while. COVID is a good example. We heard about COVID, and within a very short time, 3 months, it had became a global pandemic. And that's the challenge with AMR, that because of travel, because of food, because of it can move on food, it can move in travel, on humans, on bodies. That problem then means that we have a serious medical problem globally. And part of it then is, where do we control it? Do we then go back to animals and ensure that animal welfare is catered for, the animals are managed in an appropriate way, the biosecurity and hygiene is at higher level, so that then that problem is not seeping into human systems, and it's not seeping into contaminating the environment where both humans and animals interact on. And those are some of the things that we need to be looking at. And you're right to say that it's actually a very serious, big global problem, and we need to give it the emphasis that it requires. Let me start from the known to the unknown. First, climate change is simply the climate changing due to changes in certain things, and part of what is driving climate change is aspects of things that we are doing at farming level. For instance, the fact that we are putting a lot of animals in a very small space is leading to climate change, because these animals then release methane gas, which is one of the methane and nitrous oxide, which are some of the greenhouse gases, and that then is contributing significantly to climate change. In fact, data shows that 26% of your greenhouse gases is coming from livestock production systems, predominantly cows, but even the other animals intensively farmed produce that, lead to that problem. But the second thing we've also seen is that climate change is also a trigger to antigenic shifts, because the organisms are finding that the environment they were used to maybe was cooler. Because of climate change, you're having a hotter environment. So the less resistant organisms are selected, and you end up with very resistant organisms because of the adverse climatic conditions that they're living in. So it has been said that climate change contributes to antigenic shifts, which then could lead to antimicrobial resistance being one of them. And that's a process, and it might take a period of time to get to there. So essentially we are saying that factory farming or intensive farming processes lead to climate change because of methane and methane gas and greenhouse gases. But those climate change or greenhouse gases then contribute to a situation where genetic selection can occur, and the genes being selected could be the resistant genes, which then propagate antimicrobial resistance at certain levels. Yeah. My parting shot is saying that as an organization and as a country, a great man called Mahatma Gandhi said you could tell the goodness of a country by looking at how they treated animals.
As we have heard from Dr. Yamo, it is important to change our approach on how we produce our food, especially food animals, so that at the end of the day, the food that comes to our tables is wholesome and safe. That is all that we had for you in today's episode of The Resident Vet. Until next time, bye-bye.